Welcome back, everybody, and we're going to complete the generational archetype series with talking about Gen Alpha. So there is actually a generation beyond Gen Alpha, so that is going to be, I believe, Generation Beta, but those are going to be the ones born like mid 2025 into 2026 and beyond. So we're going to wait a little bit to discuss that generation. But Generation Alpha, okay, so I talked about Gen Z, right? And one of the interesting parts of their generational archetype is that they are the first generation to begin being born in the new millennia, right? So having that two at the beginning of their birth years does create a different archetype. Okay, so those who are born in 2000 and later, they do carry a different energy signature. Of course, each generation has lots of its own layers, right? And lots of its own kind of individual expressions. But I just think overall, understanding that the two and being in a different millennia does carry a very different energy signature. And so Gen Alpha is also going to have this, and all of them are going to have this. Whereas Gen Z, those born between like 1996 to 2000, they're still going to fall into similar expressions of everybody else born in the 1900s. It's crazy to say that, but yes, we were born in the 1900s. So Gen Alpha, the technical dates of this are 2013 to 2025. So again, I like to look at Pluto as the main signature of kind of designating the generations. Like, to me, that is one of the core parts of Pluto's kind of purpose is he gives a very different soul contract to those born in the different Pluto generations, right? And so we have Gen Alpha, who some of them had Pluto in Capricorn, and some had Pluto in Sagittarius, right? Now with Gen Alpha, the majority of them have Pluto in Capricorn. So that is the bulk of this generation. So I did discuss Pluto and Capricorn in the Gen Z video, but for Gen Alpha, 2013 to 2023-ish, I would actually really go to say 2024, because yes, Pluto did dip in to Aquarius in 2023, but it was a very brief 6-week period. Pluto didn't officially enter until 2024, and even then he had a retrograde at the end of 2024 for about 4 months, where he went back into Capricorn. So most of Gen Alpha is going to have Pluto in Cap, and this means again that the soul contract in dealing with the shadow side, right, the deep kind of excavation, the deaths and rebirths, regaining of our power, right, is going to come in the form of Capricorn, which means this is going to be one of the generations, the key ones, along with those in Gen Z who were born between 2008 and 2023, or 2008 and 2012 for that generation. The later ones had the Pluto in Cap, right? So this generation has to take their power back from the external authorities, systems, and structures, right? That is what Capricorn rules. And so we can see a lot why, I think specifically with this youngest generation here, there's a lot of discourse right now around how it is getting very challenging for teachers in schools to teach these children. They are not responding, right, in the way that maybe the previous generations did. There's lots of conversations to be had about it, right? It's like they've grown up in a completely technological world, whereas some of Gen Z and all the previous generations, millennials included, we didn't grow up with technology. Okay, so like millennials are actually the last generation to actually have a childhood without technology. Now, some of Gen Zs, especially the later ones, they did grow up around technology, but I would say it still wasn't as prevalent. Like, yes, right, the latest Gen Z is born in 2012. So at that time, yes, they're growing up in a world where social media started to take off. So a lot of them could have been very plugged in at an early age. But Gen Alpha is the main one who they have grown up. Their entire world is technological, right? Like, I remember growing up, we didn't have home computers or anything like that until I was probably like, I don't know, 12 or something like that. And still all you could do was like AIM, right? You could like send emails. You could go to like, what was that? Ask Jeeves, right? That was pre-Google. So we had a little bit of those. There was like AOL chat rooms, that kind of stuff. But most of us millennials didn't even have a cell phone until like late middle school or high school. And so we didn't grow up with technology, right? Our main years of childhood up until we were teenagers was without technology. And so it's a very different ball game to kind of come into your teens or maybe early 20s into technology, and very different from being born as an infant where everything around you is based on technology, cell phones, computers, televisions, Wi-Fi, right? Like, this is a very different world. And so I think that this is why the school system is very challenged with them. There's lots of conversations again to be had about the dangers of technology, right? But these kids particular, and those born in the very last 2 years of Gen Alpha 2024 to 2025 are going to have Pluto in Aquarius. And like I said, I think Pluto in Aquarius should be the cutoff for the next generation. But it's going to be, there's a huge rift between Capricorn is tradition. Okay, so Capricorn is the traditional archetype. This is the way we've always done things, right? Think of legacies, think of institutions that have been around for 100 years, 150 years, right? There's kind of a sense of traditionalism there. Okay, there's rules, there is structure, there is guidelines, there is the way things have always been done. And that's why Capricorn rules things like that. It rules our government and our institutions and systems and structures, because it takes time. Capricorn rules time. It takes time to set up systems and structures that can sustain and last, right? And the one way that you create sustainability in terms of a structure or an institution or a government or whatever is that you have to follow the traditional rules. Like, for instance, we're still basing our government, our judicial system, our legislative system, right, off of the Constitution, which was enacted 250 years ago. That is the epitome of Capricorn. It's tradition. Now, I'm not saying we should, I think we have to have some baseline and structure to work off of, right? Otherwise, we can't have any order, right? But it also brings up the question of like, well, we're living in a different time than 250 years ago. So if we're kind of chaining ourselves to this tradition and these old rules that they don't necessarily make sense anymore, they don't necessarily translate to the modern world. I think Gen Alpha is going to be the main kind of generation who's going to end up breaking these systems and structures. Okay, because part of Pluto's archetype, right, is taking power back. It's also learning how to use power with integrity. It teaches us our own shadows as well as the shadows we see in the world so that we can understand how to transform those shadows and how to use power effectively and in integrity. We also learn the ramifications of power and the misuse of power, right? So Pluto is a teacher of that. And so this generation is going to have to deal with the shadows of Capricorn, which is the world they grew up in, okay? Capitalism, hierarchy, authority, control, corruption. You're going to see them rebel against those things. They are going to be the ones that have to really kind of tear down those systems. Now, at the same time, they have to deal, excuse me, with those shadows within themselves. So a lot of this generation is still quite young, right? So most of you, if you watch this video, are going to be the parents of those children. It is a deep learning lesson around Capricorn where, you know, the shadows of Capricorn is an addiction to materialism. It's an addiction to wanting more. Capricorn can also really crave status and like recognition, kind of similar to how Leo is, like the boomer generation. But the difference is that Leo just wants attention. That it really just, they just want attention in the shadow, and they just want to be validated and told how amazing they are and blah, 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 right? Capricorn is seeking status and power for a very different reason. They are seeking it in order to control it. They want to be in control, whereas Leo can be very controlling as well. But like I said, the motivations are very different. So if you're raising this generation, they have to be taught that with great power comes great responsibility. And that responsibility and integrity are essential for becoming successful, for reaching some sort of goal or achievement, right? Some of the shadow of Capricorn is that they want all the achievement and success and status and power without actually doing the work. Whereas in the higher, Capricorn is willing to put in that work. They know what it takes. They know what it takes to be successful. They know what it takes to achieve something great. And that is why they are great. They can be great teachers because they've gone through the grunt work. They've gone through the challenges. They've persevered. They truly have a lot of wisdom in that way. So that is going to be one of the main contracts here, is to put in the work, to not be lazy, to not be entitled, to not be obsessed with materialism, but to also understand that power and responsibility and integrity all go together. But again, this generation, you're going to see them really, I think, standing up to and wanting to, in a way, rebel against these systems of control and structure that kind of no longer fit in this technological world, right? Again, the last 2 years of this has Pluto in Aquarius, and of course, Generation Beta will all have Pluto in Aquarius as well. And this is a generation that, again, is going to show us the good, the bad, and the ugly of technology. There's going to be a revolution around what it means to be an individual and unique, right? Aquarius is about the individualism of society, whereas Capricorn's about the rules and structures and the order of society. And so these two generations are kind of going to have to find that balance of how do we still have order and integrity and some sort of structure, right? Because you do need to have structure, while also allowing everybody to be an individual, while also saying, well, we are moving into a very technological age, and how do these two combine? How does the unknown and technology and individualism combined with these traditions and these institutions and these systems and structures? That's going to be a big question for this generation. Now, all of this generation does have Neptune in Pisces. So Neptune did move into Pisces in 2011, and we didn't have Neptune move into Aries until this year, 2026. So this entire generation is interesting because they all have the same Neptune. There's no crossover here. And like I said, the tail end of Gen Z, like the last year of Gen Z, has Neptune in Pisces, so they might relate more to Gen Alpha in this way. Neptune in Pisces is a rough go. I'm just going to be completely honest. Because of Neptune is the culture, the vibe, right? And this is why each generation, and again, Pluto to me is the marker of the generational boundaries, if you will. Within each generation, there can be different Neptunes and there are different Uranuses, right? And this creates different flavors within those generational boundaries, right? But Neptune, you will look, if you see when someone's born and you look at their Neptune, this is the culture that they grew up in. This is the vibe. This is the consciousness that was prevalent at the time. So these children grew up during what we would call the Great Awakening, right? This was a time where spirituality was on the rise. There was a lot of conversation around the ascension, uncovering our true history. Do we live in a simulation? Do we not live in a simulation? There was a lot of questions about reality, and there was also a lot of delusion. There was high levels of propaganda during this time, high levels of misinformation, illusions, lies, just total kind of a warped reality. And this is what makes this generation particularly vulnerable. Okay. So for those raising this generation, what they are going to struggle with most, because to be honest, their Plutos, mostly, again, Pluto in Capricorn, tiny bit of Pluto in Aquarius, they are here to change the systems and structures. They are here to do things in a different way. They're here to regain power from these external authorities, these external rules. They are going to be the ones that topple the old world, the old ways of doing things that have become obsolete, right? They're not going to follow the traditional structures. Okay. They also, again, I talked about the shadows. They can suffer from some entitlement, laziness, lack of perseverance, lack of grit. But if they can get that, if they can learn discipline, they can learn integrity, if they can learn hard work, they are going to really be a powerful generation who knows how to build the new world, right? Because they understand the era we're entering. They also understand the era they grew up in, and they're going to be very powerful in terms of building the new world, being very empowered within themselves that they can build anything, they can achieve anything, but they have to learn the discipline and the integrity and the perseverance first. Now, the Neptune and Pisces part of this, like I said, is challenging because they lack discernment. And again, all the generations have their issues. We all have our soul contracts. So, it is what it is. But this generation lacks discernment because they grew up during a time period. Remember, Neptune is the modern ruler of Pisces. This created almost like this very warped reality from 2011 to 2026, where nobody really knew what was real, what wasn't real, what is illusion and fantasy, and what is true reality. It was kind of a dream world. Now, this does make them incredibly intuitive. So these kids are intuitive channels. They are picking up on things from all over the quantum field. So I do believe that these kids are also the mystics. They can be old souls in many ways. Where they're very intuitive, they're very open, they sense things, they're very sensitive. And so again, this is where we have to understand that their archetype is different. They're born in the 2000s, so they already have the 2 energy, which is more feminine. It's more about sensitivity, receptivity, intuition, softness. Okay, so they carry a completely different energy signature than those of us born in the 1900s, where we're very one oriented, where we're very driven, we're very initiative, we're more masculine in that way, where it's about achievement and leadership and goals and energy, movement, and they are different. And so it does say a lot about, the new paradigm that we're entering, where there has to be this balance between masculine and feminine. There has to be the balance between the doing and the being, right? That not everything is about achievement. Not everything is about being the best. Not everything is about reaching some, big success in life and always feeling like you need to be on to the next thing. In many ways, these later generations are teaching us that sometimes it's just about being. It's about connection. It's about art. It's about beauty. It's about relaxation sometimes in many ways. But Neptune in Pisces is one that has to be very, very catered to in the way of these children have to learn discernment. They're not going to come in with it naturally. And again, this is a product of the context of when they were born. Things were confusing. Things were all over the place. Now, I do think that they are the mystics. Like I said, I think they're going to be very intuitive, extremely creative and imaginative generation. That energy should best be channeled into things like art, creative writing, inventing, innovating. They could even be very, into things like astrology, right? Or, anything that's like a little bit woo-woo, because Pisces is woo-woo, that could be music. That could be, studying the stars. That could be tarot. That could be intuitive healing, psychic abilities, mediumship. They might be really into crystals. This is a very intuitive, mystical generation. But what they have to learn is discernment. Again, they're not going to have it naturally. So as the parents of this generation, they have to be taught how to discern their energy from others, because Neptune in Pisces is also like a melting pot, which means they have very open centers. They have very open auric fields. So they're very absorbent to what is around them. And so they might have a hard time differentiating between what they are feeling versus what other people are feeling, and sensing the collective reality and sensing otherworldly energy. They have to stay very grounded, and they have to learn discernment. So that's going to be one of the main things here. And then there are 2 different Uranus groups for this generation. So the first is Uranus and Aries, and that's going to run from 2013 to 2018. So for the Uranus and Aries kids, again, Uranus is an innovator. Uranus is a rebel. Uranus wants to find its individual flow and rhythm. It wants to break out of the box. It's very genius, very creative, very futuristic. So Uranus and Aries, if there's this combination, these kids are going to be extremely resistant to taking direction. So that's just part of the shadow here, because Uranus and Aries, they're going to revolt, right, against anything that kind of threatens their autonomy. Now, again, as these kids grow up, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with, because they want to find their individual autonomy. They want to find their own unique self-identity, right? That is not based on everybody else. That isn't based on society and what they've been told. These kids are really individualistic. But this can also turn into volatile behavior. Uranus and Aries especially, they can be reckless. They can be volatile, temper tantrums, even maybe violent emotional outbursts. And again, this isn't this isn't like shade to them. This is just what they came in with. They have to learn to channel their energy properly, be grounded. They need to learn how to express themselves. That's going to be super important, because again, the Neptune in Pisces kind of creates this energetic overwhelm. You're feeling things from all different directions, and you're not even sure where it's coming from and what you're feeling, right? And then with Uranus and Aries, it wants to be expressed as assertiveness, as decisions, as autonomy, as individualized actions. So they have to learn how to kind of express their feelings, so that they can maybe talk it through, understand what they're feeling, why they're feeling it, right? Giving them autonomy is going to be very important, cultivating their sense of self-identity, but also realizing that they could become a little bit selfish or very demanding is one way, aggressive, things like that. And so the best way to channel this is, especially with Uranus and Aries, is these kids need outlets. So exercise outlets, movement outlets. Like, this is probably why a large part of this generation can't sit still, in school. It's just Uranus and Aries is so erratic. It's hard for them to sit and just sit still. They have a lot of energy. And again, with Neptune and Pisces, they're absorbing a lot and they're not sure where everything is coming from. So this can be quite a challenging mix with this astrology here. So outlets, groundedness, discernment, channeling their energy into something that lets them burn that out, that gives them a sense of self-identity and autonomy. I also think creative outlets for these kids are going to be the name of the game. Like they they thrive off imagination and creativity here. Now, the other group who's born between 2018 and 2025 is going to have Uranus and Taurus. So very different grouping here. So the Uranus and Taurus kids, there's a volatility here under the surface, whereas Uranus and Aries, it's a very external, obvious, outward volatility sometimes. Uranus and Taurus is more that they want to find their sense of self-worth in the world. They might find that they do things very differently. They also might need a completely different type of routine and stability that you as the parent is used to, okay? Because Uranus and Taurus, we all lived through it, okay? 2018 to 2026. There was volatility in everything that we knew to be safe, stable, long-lasting, right? The housing market, inflation, food cost, jobs, right? Resources, natural resources, money, the financial markets. So everything that was supposed to be stable, right? Remember, Taurus is about, think of Maslow's hierarchy, okay? The baseline of Maslow's hierarchy is like shelter, water, food, and sleep, okay? That is Taurus, okay? Aries is kind of a different conversation about their needs. Their needs is just to know that they're an individual, to know that they have self-autonomy, that they can do what they want to do, that they can make decisions, that they can exert themselves in the world, right? So I would say that's kind of a different thing. But Taurus really represents the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. If our basic needs as a human being aren't met, we can never get above that, right? And this is why poverty consciousness, scarcity, things of this nature are very sensitive for Tauruses and those with major Taurus placements. When they do not feel safe, when they do not feel like their core needs are met, they can't move beyond that. And this is what keeps us in the survival cycle. So these children grew up in a world where nothing was stable. And so you might find that these kids specifically could struggle with set routines. They might also struggle with finding stability within their bodies. And within their daily world. So I think the best thing here is they need structure for sure. These Neptune and Pisces, they will absolutely need structure. But you might want to experiment with different types of routines, different types of structures, different types of stability, right? That isn't so rigid, but allows for their creativity to come through. Change might be very hard for these kids as well. Again, because it's all about context. When you grow up, when everything is volatile, and again, you as a parent living through the Uranus and Taurus transit, you could have had maybe abundance was very up and down, right? Like abundance wasn't consistent. Maybe your housing wasn't consistent. Maybe food wasn't consistent, right? There could have been a lot of ups and downs, a lot of changes, a lot of instability. So they might need a little bit of change sometimes to their routine because this is what they're used to. But at the same time, some of these kids might actually really need a set structure and routine because the world they grew up in was so volatile. This can be deeply disrupting to their body's nervous system. They can feel uncomfortable in their body. They can feel a lack of groundedness. So it just depends on the child, the context, right? But these kids are definitely going to be here to innovate new ways to create stability, to create abundance. They are probably not going to follow the traditional path, none of them. right? All of them are going to be a little bit pioneering in the fact that they're going to do things differently. They're going to find new ways to make money, new ways to establish their self-autonomy, creative outlets, and probably that leads to more creative jobs rather than traditional roles. Pluto and Capricorn, there's going to be some rebelling against the systems here and the traditional ways of being. And so I think for all of them, it's about finding their individuality and letting them find channels and ways to express that. But they're going to need a lot of structure. There is going to, but it's very clear that the structures we have aren't working for them. So again, this will be part of the ways in which innovation is necessary. We need to innovate new systems and structures for this generation, for all of us really, but this generation is showing us very blatantly, like, flashing lights, like, hey, what y'all have going, it's not working. It's not working. And so this is really the first generation in which we are seeing at young ages, none of the current systems and structures work. Even if they do work, they don't work well. And so you can see how every generation's blueprint triggers the change. And this is where it's going to ask us to become, I think, more of a spiritual society, more of a creative society, and more of a society that is open to individualism and ingenuity and not having to take the traditional path, but finding your own path in your own way, right? And realizing that everyone is different and there is no one rule that works for everybody. There is no one guideline that works for everybody. And so if you are a parent to someone in this generation, I understand it can be very challenging because their blueprint, their archetype is it's very different, and they do have some challenging aspects here. We all do in every generation, but this one's kind of an interesting mix, if you will, between like the Pluto and Capricorn, Neptune and Pisces, which again really just struggles with discernment. There can be a lot of victim mentality here, a lot of like poor me and oversensitivity and things like that. And it's like, well, how do you keep, we want, as moving into a new world, for there to be a compassion and a softness, right? But we also need to teach ourselves that we can't be victims, and we have to learn perseverance, and we have to learn how to overcome challenges, right? And that sensitivity can be a gift, but we can't allow ourselves to become so sensitive that we're unable to be rooted and grounded within ourselves, to discern our own energy from others, learning how to place boundaries, learning how to share and express ourselves and how we're feeling and working through that, right? Like otherwise we're all going to become hermited and we're just going to pull away from the world, and we're not going to be able to do what we came here to do. So this generation's very interesting. And of course it's called Generation Alpha, which is funny to me because there's nothing really alpha about it. Like they don't have a signature of being alphas at all. Maybe the Pluto and Capricorn, some of them can show those shadows of really wanting to have control, wanting to like be the authority figure and be in control a little bit. But Neptune and Pisces, there's like nothing alpha about that at all. Uranus and Taurus, like Uranus and Aries, yes, there can be, like I said, some of the shadows of that is like being very demanding, being very selfish, only caring about your own needs and what you want to do and what you want, right? But really, if that's cultivated properly, it's really a very powerful energy to express self-identity, to find the way that you exert your energy out into the world, right? And also channeling that energy very physically. So that can be like martial arts, that can be sports, that can be any type of action and movement that really lets them burn that energy out. So, but just funny that they called it like Gen Alpha, because it's not necessarily a very alpha generation. they need a lot of guidance. There's a lot of guidance that's going to be needed because they have a powerful archetype, but it's a very mixed bag. And of course, they're just one of the first generations to be, grow up completely, as I said, in a technological world. They're also all born after 2012, which is where the ascension really kicked off. So it's it's a very interesting mix. They grew up at the time of the Great Awakening, technological advancement, but also a lot of delusion, a lot of lack of clarity, misinformation, a lot of just very challenging, and I think for all of us who have been adults through this process, just really rough energies. And the world is collapsing in real time. And so we have to understand the context of that as well. That is what they're growing up in. So all they know is kind of the old world clashing with the new world, and maybe not necessarily knowing where they fit into that. But eventually, as they grow up, they will be some of the great builders of the new world. I think as we go through the transition, a lot of them are going to be here to give these new ideas, these new perspectives and visions, and also they're going to be trying to find where they're going to fit in to this new paradigm, right? And again, how to transform the old world, because they came in at the tail end of it, right? And be the bridges in many ways to this new world. So that's Gen Alpha. That completes our generational archetype series. And now I'm going to be moving forward to talk about the retrogrades that we have coming up, because the fall into the winter and spring of 2027, we have a back-to-back retrogrades. It's really taking us through quite a regenerative process. And so we're going to dive deeply into that. So love you guys, and happy almost Lionsgate.